My name is Dennis Steed, and on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome you to tonight's Thursday Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche. We're doing this the day after an historic action taken in the House of Representatives to enact the third impeachment in American history of a president of the United States. There has never, however, been an action so both frivolous on the one hand and so criminally negligent as the one that has been taken as of yesterday. With respect to the presidency of the United States, that is. There have been many things that may be said to be as criminal, but none quite as criminally negligent as what we are seeing and has begun to occur. We're going to get right into a discussion about that. Barbara and I and others have had some discussions about these matters over the course of today. And we know that many Americans have questions, some which are procedural and some which are existential. You know, what do these people actually think they're doing? And we're going to certainly discuss those, but we'd like to first of all pose to you, who find yourselves now on the stage of history, irrespective of what you thought might be happening this coming Christmas, how you are going to address this with all of the people that you know. Because we are now involved with a dialogue with the nation. It's not really a question any longer. It's sort of like in the period of 1861 in the case of the United States. It's like the period of wars, great wars. You're suddenly plunged into a circumstance in which you are required to think from the standpoint of history and from the standpoint of the nation, not your neighborhood, not your family, not your friends, not your limited sphere of knowledge, but you're thrust into a different role. And that role is a citizen of the United States and of the process, revolutionary process that made up the creation of this nation. Now, that process did involve a certain idea of economy, what's called physical economy, and which we're going to certainly touch on tonight in reference. But it also specifically involves the responsibilities of how one conducts oneself in a republic. Because this is not a democracy, this is a republic. And it operates according to the rules of a republic, rules which are being challenged by a foreign power. A foreign power identified by us just as an abbreviation as the City of London, but going significantly beyond London and going significantly beyond that particular historical reference. So it's that which we're called upon to address in order to actually address the particular circumstance we find ourselves in tonight. And so without saying more about that, I'm going to introduce Barbara. Then we'll ask Bill Binney, who's been with us, as people to know, for various comments, and then we'll go right into questions and comments from all of you. At that point, we'll ask you to press *6 to get in the queue, and we are more than happy to try to help clarify whatever matters need to be discussed. So, Barbara.
Sure. Basically what Dennis sort of reminded me of is that everybody on this call is probably facing the year-end dilemma which everyone faces when you talk at Christmas or at Hanukkah with your friends and family, or other such celebrations. Those who are closest to you about what's going on with your life and where things are going for the next year. And particularly in light of the very dangerous event which occurred in the House of Representatives yesterday, as Dennis referenced, a very unique partisan impeachment process, a historic event, but also an event which was a complete and abject farce. It was absurd, and it is very dangerous. How are you going to approach actually describing what happened and what can be done about it? Now, you might be tempted, as I have been repeatedly in thinking about it, to go to someone like Jonathan Swift or Francois Rabelais and attack it with biting satire underlying its idiocy and pure madness. One theme you might think about is something like this: the mad queen of the house, Madame Pelosi, struggling to keep her dentures in place and to keep her Botoxed face from twitching, laid a thoroughly rotten egg on the House floor, and a whole herd of those people elected rushed to summon their best sophistries and incantations about the Founding Fathers, seeking thereby to somehow magically transform the stinking egg into a golden rock of righteousness and justice. And if you watched any of these proceedings, I'm sure that thoughts like that sort of went through your head. But that would miss the extreme danger and seriousness of this moment. The President of the United States continues to be attacked and delegitimized. The Constitution continues to be attacked and trivialized. And Americans' friends and enemies viewing it make their calculations accordingly. The apparatus which is leading the coup and which is deeply embedded in our intelligence and defense bureaucracy continues to exist and foment sedition from within. How will you answer the question of how we got here? Particularly, how will you answer the question of what is and is not in the national interest of the United States? This is, after all, an impeachment based upon the contention that providing lethal weapons to Ukraine is in the national interest of the United States. Out of all of the tales and everything else that people have commented upon, that essential claim remains virtually unchallenged. Think about that. More fundamentally, how will you portray the war which we are in, and it is a war concerning this nation's future, and how will you imagine the peace? Because you can't fight a war successfully without at the same time laying the basis for peace. So, at Dennis's suggestion, I'm going to invite a special guest into tonight's discussion to address these three questions. How did we get here? What is and is not in the national interest of the United States? And what would a peace look like if we begin to construct its conditions today? That guest is Lyndon LaRouche. In 1999, LaRouche made a feature-length documentary called Storm Over Asia. In it, succinctly, he provided the framework for answering these three questions. I'm not going to repeat this incredible production here. I'll only present summary points from it in the hope that you will watch it over the holidays. It will be posted on the LaRouche PAC website. Now, some who've seen it will recall most vividly how the documentary opens. He portrays a war breaking out involving mercenaries who attack Russia's borders in the North Caucasus, and a separate war breaking out on the borders between India and Pakistan. Both wars are conducted by mercenaries, created and developed at the behest of Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Carter's former national security advisor and the architect of most of the United States foreign policy since, Brzezinski's crony Samuel Huntington, and most explicitly the British government of Margaret Thatcher and her toady, U.S. President George H.W. Bush, former Vice President Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, a project which was developed way back in 1975 under the rubric of the Trilateral Commission and continued under their auspices by the Council of Foreign Relations project called Project 1980s. These private mercenary armies deliberately created to fight religious wars of extinction, to harass Russia both on its flanks and internally, are what we ended up fighting in our own failed war in Afghanistan. In other words, we were fighting our very own creation. These are the networks which attacked the United States on 9/11, providing the pretext to create our present surveillance state. The same private mercenary armies also developed and evolved from Ukraine's historic Banderist neo-Nazi formations. Formations controlled since World War II by British and American intelligence. These neo-Nazis were used by Victoria Nuland and others at our State Department and CIA to run the 2014 coup in Ukraine. Joe Biden and Barack Obama then put them into the government of Ukraine, and the people who testified against the president in the recent impeachment hearings are their supporters and apologists. That's not something that anybody has really commented upon except us and a few other people. Now, LaRouche says in Storm Over Asia, it's easy to see how these small wars can lead to general nuclear war. These are small wars on China's western border, on India's northern border, and on all of Russia's borders. These wars are modeled on the wars the British ran against Russia and India during the 19th and 20th century. If they reach a certain state of development, where Russia or China are faced with an existential choice concerning the continued existence of their state, well, a terrible and escalating price will be paid by those escalating the tensions, particularly, as LaRouche points out, if these insurgencies continue under conditions of economic crisis. Now, step back for a moment from Storm Over Asia and what I just painted for you, and really think about who is attacking Donald Trump and why. Well, the answer to that lies in what Trump proposed in his campaign and continues to advocate and act upon today. Trump opposed what he called the globalist and what we call the imperial order, put into place most recently following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989 by George H.W. Bush, Francois Mitterrand, and particularly Margaret Thatcher. He opposed NATO and U.S.-British regime change operations in the small geopolitical war regimes which have flourished since 1989. This is the so-called New World Order, a world of financiers and faceless bureaucrats in which wealth is not generated from the physical productivity of the economy or the increasing standards of living and labor power of populations. Rather, wealth is generated from systemic looting of existing resources through the austerity regimes of the IMF and World Bank, the WTO, and similar globalist institutions, and the radical schemes such as environmentalism for reducing the populations which economies are supposed to serve. Wealth is generated by taking high-wage jobs away from formerly advanced countries and exporting them to other countries in pursuit of the lowest wages possible for the production of the goods necessary for human existence. It is also generated, perversely, by a huge industry built on supporting wars or possible wars against those who oppose the mores and ideas of society promoted by the elites of the New World Order, the people of Davos. And there's a constant effort to suppress and undermine what are called revisionist regimes by these people. That's the word that appears in our present National Defense Authorization Acts with reference to Russia and China. They're called revisionist regimes. And what is meant, quite literally, and I kid you not, by the term revisionist in these documents is that these basically are societies which wish to change history, which is how we define it, and which wish to change the present order of things as defined by the so-called New World Order. It is this group of people which imposed the post-industrial service economy on the United States, beginning with the British takedown of the Bretton Woods monetary system in 1971. In their idea of society, a dumbed-down populist is kept docile by free access to dope, pornography, gambling, Hollywood entertainment, and everybody scrambles to exist by working several jobs at the lowest wages possible and For their recreation, they can engage in endless contemplations about what gender they are. This is a regime which deliberately produces suicides and addictions because it cannot articulate why life itself has any mission or purpose. Our enemy within, the people who share this idea of human beings, the financiers of Wall Street and the City of London, they impose this on us, not China or any other foreign nation. Donald Trump, like Lyndon LaRouche, John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, and FDR, proposes that the nation-state is the highest political order of existence of any country, that NATO was obsolete and should be abolished, that fair and reciprocal trade should replace the globalist schemes like NAFTA, which has destroyed American productivity and jobs, that the future, as the president said at the UN, lies with the patriots, not the globalists, and the cooperative relations with Russia and China based on common interests are the road to peace. And for the globalists, these declarations by an American presidential candidate and then an American president were a declaration of war, a war which will not end until the globalists, not just their crazy offspring in the Democratic Party of today, are defeated. These are the people who are driving this battle in the United States, and they will use any means necessary to get rid of those who threaten them, whether it be this president or his voters. That is why we have said you must look to the British establishment and NATO and their networks here for who it is that originated and continue to drive this coup. Once you start to look at what these people were doing in 2014 to 2016, beginning with the coup in Ukraine, which created a government loaded with actual card-carrying neo-Nazis right on Russia's border, the trail you are on starts glowing before your eyes as clear as day. It literally involves all the same people. And it is absolutely no accident that we have come now, full circle, back to Ukraine. The people brought into Congress to testify against the president put this obscenity in place, which is Ukraine presently. And this is the actual crime of Joe Biden, which everyone is avoiding, a crime which threatens all-out war if carried to its conclusion. And the greatest insanity we are witnessing, equal only to the insanity of this no-crime impeachment itself, is the lunacy which says that giving lethal weapons to a nation whose president must kowtow to neo-Nazis, determined to have a war with Russia, is in the national interest of the United States. This is the scope you must think about and internalize if you want to win this war. That is why even if you have what seem to you and to me to be huge victories, like the Horowitz report, Robert Mueller's crash and burn, this process will not stop until you win total victory against the actual enemy, and also until you construct the peace. Now, as LaRouche emphasizes, this battle boils down to two very different concepts of human beings. Our Constitution is based on the idea of a nation-state existing for purposes of advancing that divine spark of reason and creativity, which our forefathers said exists in every individual human being, and they proposed that we use the powers of the presidency and the Congress to advance the general welfare, not just for ourselves, but for our posterity, making progress for generations hence. That is why the founders rejected a preamble which had the mission statement of pursuit of life, liberty, and property. That's what John Locke advocated. Instead, we chose the radically different one, the new one, which said our mission was the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness, something advocated by Locke's epistemological and philosophical opponent, Gottfried Leibniz. But the opponents of the American system and the American Revolution, the oligarchs of Wall Street, and the City of London have a completely different and contrary belief about the fundamental nature of human beings. They believe that humans are so many cattle to be herded and culled and controlled, that there is no inherent goodness in people, just evil which must be regulated and controlled. Now, with respect to the second question, what is our strategic interest? Here is how LaRouche answered it, and that answer in turn will introduce an answer to the third question, how to win the peace, both on the scale of the present fight for the nation's future and in the larger arena of the world as a whole. In Storm Over Asia, LaRouche defined our strategic interest thusly, and I'll quote him. Our interest is to bring into being on this planet a hegemonic community of perfectly sovereign nation-state republics which share the commitment to the defense of the general welfare, which is the cornerstone of our federal constitution, that these nations must each be perfectly sovereign. We want no empire. We want no hegemony. We want alliances of the sort which must occur only between nation-states, which agree that the idea of a community of perfectly sovereign nation-states is the fundamental interest of each and all. How should the United States, he asked, conduct its foreign policy with a nation which is a potential adversary, or simply an unfriendly nation, under the principles of the community of principle he just defined? That community of principle which was defined before LaRouche by John Quincy Adams, James Monroe, a whole slew of our founding fathers who actually understood that this was our defining mission. The precedent for this kind of diplomacy, which is inherent in the American system, was consolidated in Europe in 1648 to 1650 in the context of the 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. That's the treaty which actually ended the ruinous and persistent period of European religious warfare. It is absolutely no accident that as the new world order came into being, British Prime Minister Tony Blair made explicit arguments at the University of Chicago, essentially saying that the Treaty of Westphalia was trash and should be tossed into the dustbin of history. Now, what is the Treaty of Westphalia about? Well, essentially, you had religious warfare going on, a deeply entrenched warfare, a warfare which led to apparently endless rounds of hatred-retribution, kind of a system in which wars would never seem to end, almost like the one we have now. And the fundamental principle of the Treaty of Westphalia was, we're not going to basically end these wars by recriminations, by retributions, by war guilt or war blame. We're going to start from scratch to build an order which is designed to bring peace. How do you do that? Well, you do that very similar to what Trump is trying to do in his own way. You do it by going out and trying to figure out what is in the interest of this other nation. What is their interest which I can contribute to, which is a useful interest and a universal interest for all of humanity? If we start out by saying we agree as sovereign nation states that we don't want to be an empire, but we agree that nation state to nation state we're going to collaborate on common interests, well, that's how we begin to start to approach peace. And you begin to see that in his approach, Trump's approach to North Korea, to Russia, to China. But you also see that this approach has produced a profound outrage and a determination to attack Trump at all costs. What's he touched upon there? He's touched upon the whole history of positive American foreign policy in the tradition of John Quincy Adams and others, and most specifically that which was expanded upon by Lyndon LaRouche. say to the other nation, what is it that we really need? Can't we find a way to cooperate and build peace and build security and build cooperation? Can't we go to others and say, isn't common justice so much in the interest of us all? Haven't we learned our lesson? Isn't it time that we cooperate? Isn't it time that we build a system which is consistent with the interests of us all, as they tried to do in the very difficult negotiations which established the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Remember, a peace came about out of a hateful, genocidal, incredibly determined religious war in which human passion was stoked to the maximum. Now, revert and think again about 2018, shortly after the most recent elections. President Trump really tried. He went to Pelosi and he said, look, let's work together on infrastructure, let's have a space program, let's create an economy which can actually reproduce itself at a higher level, and let's make peace with Russia and China. Let's make a health care plan that actually works. That was rejected by the Democrats and certain Republicans because they operate not on behalf of the Constitution and what the LaRouche movement has persistently tried to put into place. They operate on behalf of the oligarchs, pure and simple, on behalf of the financiers in the City of London and those who have a completely different view of the purpose of society and of human beings. And we're faced right now with a situation in which we've got to split the simply gullible and ill-informed away from that enemy and begin to act with the president in a movement to build the peace here, instead of drifting into the division which clearly the City of London and the financiers have divined as a way to destroy the United States. The way to do that is to stop the silliness about labeling people socialists and other nonsense that goes on in the political arena that trivializes the problem. Instead, we've got to advocate for the common interest right now of all citizens of the United States. And that means we have to advocate for a program of economic growth, which we know works. We have to go out and campaign on a huge investment in fusion power to transform the entire world's economy to a higher level. We have to go out and campaign for the space program, which President Trump has started in the form of Project Artemis. But we've got to make that space program a program with Russia and China at the very frontiers of science. We have to go out with big ideas about rebuilding our cities and building the fundamental infrastructure for a modern economy here and throughout the world. This effort creates thousands of productive jobs, and it creates a genuine optimism about the future because Americans once again embrace their purpose and their mission in the world. And we can define for them through the American system that they're recovering something which they had once, but which was destroyed and lost because we gave in to this enemy within. We need to make both money and our intelligence services the slaves of this program, in the sense that they are deployed solely to advance it and make it work. This is the essence of LaRouche's 4 laws for an economic recovery, not only of the United States, but of the world. And you might add, winning the peace here in our nation and also abroad. If we can win people with this vision, while we are countering and neutralizing the crap being thrown at the population by the enemy, we will have won the present war, but we will have also, and most importantly, won the peace. So that's my reflection for how to talk to people over this period and how to really go for broke in terms of winning this battle.
Okay, Barbara, I'm going to open up the
Q&A session has started. To ask your question, please press *6.
Questions, comments, and so on. And I have something I would like to say, but let me just check and see. Bill Binney, are you with us? Okay. So I'll make sure that I give him a call. I hadn't seen him show up in the queue, so I wasn't sure. I didn't get any indication he was around. So I have the following that I just wanted to observe before we go to questions and answers. Barbara referenced the idea of the preamble of the Constitution of the United States and its discussion about the idea of our posterity, that things are done for posterity. That may seem to be a self-evident idea, but actually it was a treasonous idea so far as the British Crown was concerned, because the notion of posterity that's contained in the American Constitution is not biological heredity. It's constitutional. You know, England doesn't have a constitution, not a written constitution. Everything that people have there, you know, the British are subjects. They are not citizens. So you can go to London and you can go all around there and feel very whatever. You go to Canada and New Zealand and these other places, but, you know, fundamentally, strictly speaking, these people are subjects. They recognize a queen. They recognize a monarchy. And therefore, any so-called rights they have are merely privileges. There's no constitutional form of government in England. If you don't understand what we're saying with that, or in Great Britain, it's true. Look it up. In America, the notion of heredity is based on the Constitution, not your biology. In other words, the concept is that all Americans, no matter where they came from, it can be Africa, South America, Asia, Latin America, Europe, all of them represent equally and under the Constitution a single heredity, a single future. That is treasonous with respect to particularly the so-called families that have believed that they've run the world below these many centuries and even millennia. So to understand one of the big differences between when we talk about a Republican United States and a presidential system as opposed to a parliamentary system, parliamentary democracies relative to sovereign presidential republics are evil. So there is nothing in common between a Tony Blair, for example, and a president of the United States. True, you may have good individuals who may be prime ministers in other countries, but the issue of a sovereign president acting as a sovereign individual, as a head of state on behalf of a nation, is something that the United States first established as a constitutional fact and factor in human history. It's an invention. And it is the oldest society, continuous Republican government of its type in the world. So when people talk about the young United States or the immature United States or the adolescent United States, recognize that actually the primary place in the world that has succeeded from the standpoint of establishing from a scientific standpoint, the urgent and efficient necessity of sovereign, independent self-government is the presidential system of the United States, and that is what was attacked yesterday. That's not an unusual role for the Democratic Party. They tend to come up with these sorts of things every once in a while. They did it back in 1861. They were a party of slavery and treason. And as we say, if treason happened, can slavery be far behind? But I only wanted to say this because I think it's important that we kind of get where we are this evening and what it is that our movement is doing, which is unique to us. We want it to not be unique to us. We want everybody doing it. But I think, and I wanted to make sure that that was said, keep in mind Roosevelt's famous words, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat to advance. We have the institutions of government. Americans just have to use them. and we have to deal with the fears that people have. So I'm going to bring our first person in as a question, and I'm going to seek to get Bill Binney on the other line. So, Barb, I'm going to ask you to take it when we get our question here.
Sure.
Okay. Are you able to hear us?
Yes. Hi, this is Jay from Michigan.
Hey, Jay.
Hey, I really like what you were talking about. I really enjoy, the positivity, talking about nations working together and higher ideals. The space program may have some great benefits to it. One of the challenges, though, is being able to even have those kinds of discussions. It feels like, anytime we're speaking in public, we're beaten down, we're labeled, hey, you're a conservative, your message isn't welcome here on campus. The social media is not, allowing you to put forward your thoughts to connect with other people. And that's a real challenge. How do we address that while we're also trying to talk, at a higher, more positive level to get people to come along with us?
Well, the major thing we got to do is we got to organize. All right. The biggest problem. I was just looking. It was forwarded to me, from Ron out there in Michigan. The analytics which Brad Parskelly put together for last night's rally in Battle Creek, and they're kind of amazing demographics because what he says is, I think it's something like 1/4 of the people that were at the rally have never ever voted before. Another 1/4 of the people who were at the rally only voted once in the last 4 elections. Another 17% of the people were Democrats, and it goes so on. The problem that we have is that there's an untapped conservative majority out there who is slowly being politicized. And what we've got to do is we've got to not pay attention to necessarily what's going on with the people who are trying to suppress this movement. We've got to pay much more attention to the people who are slowly being politicized. We have to listen and we have to educate. And they are, basically angry at the fact of what's happened to them under the rubric of the very thing I was describing, under the mass exodus of jobs, under the situation of constantly being told how they're supposed to behave. A friend of mine once said, there are people who are coming to recognize that, they've been constantly shat upon, and people have called that rain as opposed to actually what's going on. So the challenge is to take this mass of people who are in a kind of a mass strike formation and actually get them organized in a direction which we want to take them, rather than, sort of paying attention to the constant bullets which are flying at you as you're doing this. And that's basically something which actually characterizes most successful wars, is you overcome what the enemy fire is by actually knowing where you're going and advancing your cause, and worrying about that only to the extent that it really, really, really gets in the way. But my contention is we spend too much time worrying about the victimization which occurs of people who are expressing these views, and not enough time of recognizing that we have a whole lot of allies around us. We just have to bring them out of kind of the fearful pattern which they've gotten into, and which they're coming out of at this point in response to this crisis. There's a phenomenon, if you look at these Trump rallies. People who you would never think are political are coming out there, and they're saying, I'm going to be up for this one. The question is, can we deepen that to more than attending rallies and actually saying, okay, yeah, I recognize that, I have to come forward at this point and act. And that's the challenge which we actually face. And I tend to try and stay away from worrying all that much. The things you're saying are very real, don't get me wrong. There are huge challenges in terms of the election. But there's a certain process going on which, we're winning overall. We just have to win the longer-term battle. There's no short-term battles here. We can win in the short term and lose the war. And that's the way it's going to go, I think, for the election year and so forth. And the question is, can we deepen the understanding conceptually of everybody about what the war is we're actually fighting. And that's how I'd answer your question.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, very good. We'll go to the next question. Okay, are you able to hear us?
Hi, my name is Jackie. I'm in Bolivar, Missouri.
How you doing?
I'm good. The thing that I keep seeing as a pattern in all of that's happening is that, and I don't want to use labels like Democrats or Republicans, but certain people just keep breaking the rules and getting away with it. And it goes, like Mueller, he what did he go, 2.5 years, and he already knew in the first 3 months that he was screwed, but he did it anyway, and he hired all these people, and he spent all this money, and us taxpayers paid for it, and they came up with nothing. And so then they move on to the next thing, which was impeachment, and they drag that around. And now Nancy Pelosi is holding up the articles of impeachment so that we have to keep going. Like, when do they stop breaking the rules?
Well, I think
what do we do about it?
I think that there's several things that you can think about in terms of all of that. All right, what's happened is that everything that's gone on that was protected, and that's the reason why Mueller existed. That's the reason why all of these things happened in the Justice Department. All these people thought they could get away with it because they were protected. This is what's been going on over and over and over again in the United States ever since the death of Franklin Roosevelt. A period of endless failures in which there's no accountability anywhere for enormous failures and for policies which ended up in thousands of people being killed needlessly. Now what's happening slowly, and I sense the frustration, all right, but slowly that protection is being taken away. Bill Barr was on TV tonight saying that John Durham's investigation extends to intelligence agencies, and he emphasized private citizens. Shortly thereafter, the New York Times released a story, which we started talking about just at the beginning of this call, where Durham is apparently asking for John Brennan's phone records. What we have, if you look at it, is an exposure of all of this stuff, and there's a dynamic going on. There's a reason why Nancy Pelosi is trying to prolong this thing, because she knows that she thinks that the longer they prolong it, the better off they're going to be. The reality which is asserting itself, you could call it simply a reality principle, is that the more they get into this, the more they're digging themselves into a terrible hole with the population, and the more we see the population is actually responding. So I wouldn't worry too much about her silly threat to withhold the articles from sending them over to the Senate. There's lots of ways the Senate can answer that, and I think the way to think about it in terms of what do we do about it is we have to get to the Senate, and we have to basically say, look, there's all sorts of things which are now coming to fruition. We have the Horowitz report. We can see all the things that were done. We now know definitively, and everybody knows, including every single elected representative at this point, that there was no there documented as of January 2017. Nothing. And yet they proceeded. So what's going to happen here is a lot of things are being, which were assumed to be forever institutions like the FISA court. All of these things are being thrown up for grabs right now. And the question is, can we get to the senators, which is really where the rubber is going to hit the road at this point, and where there's really a lot of ferment right now about what to do. Can we as citizens get to them and say, hey, we really want a cure to this thing. We really want the whole thing with Ukraine to be investigated. It might not happen in the impeachment trial because I don't think there's going to be a long impeachment trial. I think what's going to happen is that, these things will be gotten to the Senate. There will be a short trial. The president will be acquitted. And then, essentially, these people are going to have to answer for what it is they have done. I'm not putting my hopes in a very short process where John Durham is going to do something in the next month or so. That ain't going to happen because these processes take time. The question is, what do citizens right now do to hold these people accountable? And there's lots of things which we can do, but we have to understand, just as I emphasized tonight, what's the nature of the battle? What's really at stake here? And it's not a simple thing of, well, you know, just what's happened to this president. What this president has opened up, because he's fighting for the population, is the whole nasty apparatus which controlled things very readily up to the time of his election. Now we're at one of those times in history where everything can change very suddenly. But we've got to understand who it is we're fighting and what the stakes are. And once you understand that, you understand that it's not a simple battle. It's like fighting the Revolutionary War all over again in many respects.
Yeah, I get that. I really do. I agree with you 100%. I'm just so tired of seeing them get away with so much crap. I mean, I'm tired of like this.
What we're going to do?
Nancy Pelosi came up with this withholding of the articles of impeachment. I'm like, okay, look, I just saw a court case the other day where the judge asked the person being charged, and she was a judge. The judge asked her, do you have anything to say? And she said no. Well, then 10 minutes later, she decided she had something to say. And he said, too late.
Well, that may very well be what happens to, that may be very well what happens to Miss Pelosi. I thought the New York Post headline was...
But it's let me just say, it operates on a different level. Here's the point. Jackie wants to scalp. I understand. And not only that, I think people should get scalped. I think that should happen.
Get what?
Scalps, you know, like an Indian, right? Gets on top and pulls the hair up, and you scalp somebody, right? That's what people want. That's right. Scalp, not scallops, okay? Not shrimp, not lobster, scalp.
I want it to be fair.
Yeah. Well, that's what would be fair. You know what's this? Now, let me say something about this. We believe in this. We think this is the right thing to do. And we've got a couple of tasks, several of things that we're going to talk about a little bit as the call goes on. So stay tuned, because we are going to give you a few ideas about how to get some scalps in the short term, which will it may not be everything, but it will be, shall we say, emotionally satisfying. And
I'm smiling.
Yeah. Stay, you'll hear it during the course of the call. Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your call.
All right.
All right. Are you able to hear us?
Hi, Dennis and Barbara. This is Gerald. Can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I have a short report I want to give based on a request we got from Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche over this past weekend, and I'm hoping Bill Binney is there in earshot and can, because I do have a couple of questions for him based on this short report. So, what Bill should know is that Helga had asked us to, as Bill said last week on this call last week, he said, I've been saying all along that the Russia hack never happened, and we have some more evidence coming out recently. And then he went on to talk about the new evidence about Guccifer 2, and that this was a fraud on top of the Russia hack fraud, on top of the so-called Internet Agency fraud. Yeah, okay. So the report is, I took Bill's words and the copy of the conference call from last week and sent it out to former Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Bill Barr, a whole bunch of Democrat, Republican radio shows, columnists, others, probably about 40 or 50 total. And what happened as a result is one of the columnists, Eric Zoyce, who's up in Vermont, he sent that break the blackout against Bill Binney, exposing the big lie of Russia, and he sent it out to 150 of his contacts in various media, websites, radio, internet, the whole thing. And as a result of this, there's been a breakout of coverage, particularly today, the website that's called Zero Hedge, also the Duran, the Off Guardians Spot, and Reddit have all posted our conference call from last week on their websites, and there's now thousands of extra people listening to Bill's thing from last week. So, and what Eric said in a note he sent to me, he said what Bill Binney said should be top of the front page news in every newspaper. That's how important this is. So my question to Bill Binney, and I think it's actually every one of us listens or reads on the internet or gets on radio shows, we all, everyone on this call has the power to break up. I think it was Larry Johnson said a few weeks back that less and less people are getting their news from the major media. Of course, Trump understands that. That's why he uses the Twitter. So you can actually, you don't have to be victimized by the media. You can flank it out. And so my question to Bill, if he's around, is, you know, because he's been through this, from what I could see in past interviews, he was the breakout on 9/11, blew the whistle on 9/11. He blew the whistle on the spying stuff of the NSA, and he's blown the whistle on this Russia-hacked DNC. I think what Durham is doing and what we're doing can actually bust apart everything from the John F. Kennedy assassination, 9/11, you know, lies about 9/11, and most importantly, we got to get the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, because Lyndon LaRouche was targeted in the same way, even more viciously than what's happening with Trump today. So my question to Bill is, can we break this whole thing open in his view? Can we get this thing spreading and spreading? Because there are, as Barbara said, there's millions and millions of people just getting active now, and we can give them something to do.
Gerald, I'm not sure. I don't know whether he's on or not. See if he says anything. He's not.
Okay.
We'll refer to him, but I think the relevant point is what you pointed out, which has been done, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. I want to just continue to go to questions. Oh, I should also say press *6 to get in the queue. I see more people have gotten on, so you know, just if you have a question or comment, press *6 and get in the queue. All right, are you able to hear us? Hello, if you may still be muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
You need to speak into the phone.
I need to what?
Speak into the phone, not on a speakerphone. We can't.
Oh, I am. I'm not on a speakerphone. I'm speaking into the phone.
Okay, just speak a little bit more loudly, then it may be all right.
Are we all right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. One quick comment is at the beginning of this call, the gentleman. Sorry?
Who's calling? Just give your first name.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Jim from Vermont. At the beginning of the call, a gentleman said something that implied or stated that he thought that the official story of 9/11 was actually true. He was reporting, and I just I was kind of shocked. I was going to hang up right away that if one of the LaRouche people actually believed that, there's something funny going on, because certainly Mr. Binney doesn't believe it. So anyway, that's that comment. My question is, do you think that Trump could possibly be using the Brer Rabbit ploy and is quite happy that they threw him in the briar patch and is waiting for the Senate to take the ball and run with it and maybe activate Barr, who seems to be sleeping through all of this? So that's my question. Do you think this couldn't go forward because maybe Barr can now be activated, that Trump has actually succeeded in getting to where we are now? So, thank you.
If I want to answer that question, I don't take anything for granted in this situation. As I tried to emphasize, it's a war with a very powerful enemy. we're making great progress at this point because we're actually exposing the enemy, and we seem to be getting people on our team activated, and there seems to be a transformation taking place in both the population itself and most certainly in the Senate at this point, and also in the Republicans in the House. This is a transformation. We haven't won the war in terms of changing or getting at least the people in Washington to recognize the full nature of the war. That's why I outlined the paradox of saying that the unchallenged premise of all of this impeachment is the idea that providing lethal weapons to Ukraine is a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really, if you look at it, why is that still the kind of central idea which is not really attacked with the ruthlessness it should be? Because, after all, we're giving lethal weapons to a country which, despite the promise of Zelensky, is still completely controlled by the neo-Nazis who we put into power there to turn that nation as a martial order against Russia to start a war. Why is nobody challenging, except for the people around us and the president himself, the idea that this is a good idea to give Ukraine lethal weapons?
Well, it's possible that it has something to do with the good idea about killing everybody in Yemen and the same good idea about killing everybody in Gaza.
Right. You're exactly right. But that's the thing that we've got to concentrate on, actually getting people to recognize and change, and that's what the present debate still covers over. In terms of the president's motivations, I'm sure that you can look at the present situation and you can look at the polling and you can take some solace in thinking, well, things are going our way.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that this is a very powerful group of people. They have, after all, controlled the world since the death of Franklin Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. We are making huge progress, but again, we have to define the program, and the president has to define the program for what is the presidential campaign of 2020 going to look like. What's he running on? How do you get these people who are crazy back into some level of sanity, or break them away from the insanity which they've sort of bathed themselves in? And the only way you can do that is through a really positive political program for fundamental economic reconstruction of the United States, such as the LaRouche War Laws program. That's the whole point of how you win wars. You win wars by inspiring people to make the peace. And that's a challenging concept for most people in the United States right now, because we're so used to this constant division, this constant back and forth, this constant definition of the sides of the battle, that we forget that our fundamental job is to define the future which we need to create for both ourselves and for our posterity, as the Constitution says.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I believe I'm with you now. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Welcome.
I thought I was with you, but evidently I was not connected, so I tried again. So I'm back. Okay.
Good.
All right. Okay. Well, okay.
And I wanted to say something about that.
Say for a long time. You should have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me say something about the fellow who called about, can we really fix this? And he went through what he did and all. And I just wanted to thank him for doing that, because that's really great. That gets the message out. That's the way, getting the message out, getting people to understand what's going on and knowing about it is how we break it up. That's the sunlight that will scare these people and make them run and hide.
There you go, Gerald. You got your answer.
That's right. Pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go to the next question, and actually I have one or two other things people have been texting me for Bill. So I'm going to go to our next person. All right, are you able to hear us?
Good evening.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Ernest from Illinois. And first of all, I want to thank Barbara for the insight that she gave on how to address, the skeptics or the herd, with satire, and then Lynn would add humor. So that's the first thing. But then the other thing is that I just want to give a quick report on what I'm doing in Chicago in terms of intersecting with various organizations and, bringing out, passing out the literature and having meetings at my church. And, but the thing about it is I recognize that these are right times for where we can make this change, that this needed change for humanity. And the other thing I would like to say is that I guess I'll put it as a question. How can we get the Choral Project into Chicago?
Dennis, you want to
Ernie,
answer
let me
that?
ask you a question. Yeah, let me ask you because people there are a lot of people on the call, a lot of people on tonight. Why don't you just say what you did or have been doing in Chicago, because you're talking about the South Side of Chicago, right? Am I correct?
Right.
Okay. So you're in the South Side of Chicago. You're doing stuff around Trump in the South Side of Chicago. Just give people an idea of what you've actually done, and then we'll answer the question.
Okay. Well, what I've done is that I've basically passing out literature, talking to people. I had a meeting at my church, about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, where we had a number of individuals, and basically, I'm just talking to people, giving them the website, and then the other thing I've been doing is, but
this was not a meeting of Trump supporters, was it?
No.
Yeah, so explain, because people don't know what you're doing. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, I'm just trying to organize to the best of my capability, and getting people together, sharing the material, discussing the ideas, giving them the truth. Just like real quick, my grandson came in last night, and he asked me about the impeachment. So I went into detail about what it was. British coup, run through intelligence, and all of that. So that's all I can say without, nothing dramatic, but just little bit by little bit.
Okay, so here's my point. See, that's going on right in the middle of exactly where people think there's no support for Donald Trump at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, the issue is it's not an issue of support for Donald Trump. The issue is the Constitution of the United States. So when people talk about this thing called the choral principle, let me explain. So there's a lot of new people on the call and may not know what we're referring to. Our organization has had the practice of putting together choruses in different parts of the United States. Now, this project originated, I was involved in it in 1987 up in New Hampshire. Lyndon LaRouche was running for president. And it was in September of 87. He said to me he wanted 500 organizers to be in, the state of New Hampshire was one of the first primaries. So what happened was I got up to go to the phone and said, okay, I'll call people around the country and tell them to get people in here right now. Because I thought he meant you do what the campaigns do. And he said, why are you going to do that? I said, well, you just said you wanted 500 people, organizing. So I'm going to call people up. He said, you don't have to call anybody. I said, well, where are people going to come from? I said, they come from right here. I was like, I know you're from here, Lynn. I guess you like New Hampshire. But come on, I've seen these people. These people are scared to death. And he said, well, what you have to do is you have to organize them into a chorus. He said the reason that they're scared is that they don't even know what their own voice sounds like.
Mm.
He said they've never tried, they've never been in a position to lift their own voice, and therefore they don't hear their own voice, they don't see themselves, they don't know what they can do. So organize a chorus. That's what the choral principle is, just so everybody understands that. Now, I'll tell you what the second person that told me that. The second person that told me that was an old civil rights organizer. He's still alive, Bernard Lafayette. Matter of fact, he's head of King's old organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's the chairman of it now. operates out of Atlanta. And here's what he said. He said when they went in to do the original organizing in places like Selma, Alabama, he said there's a big difference between having a protest and having a movement. He said anybody can organize a protest. And, people are angry and they're frustrated or whatever they are, and they have a picket line, they make noise, they go home. Basically, usually things don't change. He said, but when you have a movement, he said the way you can tell the difference is that in a movement, people make up their own songs. They sing and they make up their own songs. He said, and that's the thing that we always knew was the difference in the days of the Civil Rights Movement. Why is this? What are we talking about here? Because this gets right at the issue of what the lady earlier with Jackie, she wants scalps. She's right. Because the issue is that everything is unjust. You keep saying, okay, we're going to wait and see what happens to the courts. But really, deep down, you figure there's a deal being made here. Yeah, maybe somebody's going to go to jail. But, all these people need to go to jail. Bill will tell you about what he thinks about the NSA. Yeah, all those people need to go to jail. We're talking about 4 or 5. I mean, he has a certain description we're not going to give on the call here of how he thinks this. But the point is that there's a lot of people. And so people feel frustrated. When you feel frustration or anger, which are justified, you got to sing. That's what we found. And you may think we're talking about therapy. It's not therapy. The concept is there is justice, and we can get justice. And we can get to justice in America. Think about these rallies that are going on. Sorry, been expressed. I'll just say one last thing and then move on. Is what you're hearing, why people are coming out, why people that have never voted are coming out, why people that have voted once in their life are coming out. Half of this country never votes in presidential elections, you realize. So every time there's been a presidential election, at least since the period of the 60s, half of the people never vote. So their level of frustration and anger and despair and indifference is so great, they don't even get in the process. So what's going on right now, which you're seeing expressed in some of these rallies, is that group of people is getting activated. Now, this is crucial because a lot of those, that's where the real country is. That's where the real patriots of the country are. I don't mean because they're indifferent. I don't mean because they're angry. But I mean because they got to hear somebody speaking to them that they say, this guy's not a phony. This guy's not a hustler. This guy is not just a charlatan. Maybe something can happen. They'll probably try to kill him. They'll probably try to suppress him. They'll probably try to jail him. They'll probably try to impeach him. Maybe I had to show up for the fight. If there's a fight. See? That's our point. What we got to do. Our job is, and that's why we're out there in the street. That's why we do what we do. That's why, Ernie, you're in Southside Chicago talking to people that think they have no relationship to Donald Trump whatsoever. And you're finding, in fact, I know, because so that's it. That is the core principle. That's the way
If I could just add,
sure, go ahead.
I'm proud to say that I was in New Hampshire in '88, and I was in some of your classes. So again, that's why I'm really kind of hopeful that we can get that core a live group right here in Chicago. So that's something we can work on.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you for the call. We're going to go on here, and we're going to get back to Jackie's scalp issue as we go along as well.
I hope so.
Okay.
Hi, this is Marty from New York City.
Yeah, just before you start, Bill, are you still with us? Because I think I may have heard Bill get disconnected there.
No, I think I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, you are. Great. Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Good. Just
All right.
wanted to check you out. Okay, Marty, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was good because the question was for Bill Binney.
Okay.
We got the Senate trial coming up, and I think everybody would agree that you should be the first witness. Is there any talk of you testifying in the Senate, or do you think that's a possibility? Is anybody talking to you about that?
Well, I certainly think that I should be doing that because it certainly would blow a hole in the in all this conspiracy by the shadow government and the Democrats. So yes, I think I should be there, but I haven't received a subpoena or anything yet.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Very good. We'll go to the next question. All right. Are you able to hear us?
Yes, hi, I can. Hi, Bill, Barbara. This is Alvin here in New York.
There?
Yeah. Yeah, can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So let's see. Last night, a number of us were in a class with Mike Billington, where, among other things, he was overall presenting us with a summary of the history of China, going from its earliest days. And I'm not going to get into that there. It just was completely different from the history that we've been taught. But in the discussion with Mike at this meeting, the subject of Trump and Russia and China relations came up. And throughout this entire treasonous coup attempt and impeachment, he has been indeed engaging in dialogue with high-level delegates, with China around trade, but with Russia on much broader topics. And I just think that it's a real testament to his strength to be trying to conduct his duties in handling foreign relations as president. But Mike expressed that in our contacts with various officials, that they have a very defensive posture toward what they see happening, and that they're very concerned when they see this coup taking place. We talk about losing the republic and having a chance of things going our way, but there is no one. I mean, you have Tulsi Gabbard, who I think bravely voted present or just announced her presence and did not go along with the impeachment, who of course understands what statesmanship and diplomacy is about on an international level. But I just wanted to say that if we lose this president, we really do perhaps get to a point where World War III becomes inevitable if we allow this treasonous financial and intelligence apparatus, British-led and run, to drive this president out. So we have to face that chilling fact that without that, there's certainly no Democrat now or any real Republican that has the type of attitude of development, of peace, of ending the endless wars that Trump has, that I can see. So yeah. I wanted to put that out and look forward to hearing your response to that.
No, for my part, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's why I support him. I look also to Attorney General Barr and also Prosecutor Durham to actually see if they start doing the right thing, which means they have to start indicting the people who've been doing this. If they don't do that, then we basically lost them, because they then are basically co-opted into the shadow government, and they're going to be doing the bidding of the shadow government. We can't, if they don't come out and start indicting people, then they're lost. So, and then President Trump is left by himself, and that's unfortunate. But that's the way that this swamp has been surviving there for decades. It's nothing new to them. I mean, and that's why they have such a depth of defense. They've got so many people who want to protect each other, because if they don't, and one starts to fall, they all fall. But the way around it, in my view, is what we talked about earlier, is that getting information and knowledge out to people on a wide scale and doing it in such a way that they can't stop this information flow, so people really know what's going on, and they won't put up with it. I mean, you could see the reaction like in Brexit or in France, or even here with electing President Trump, or the reaction and the support he gets when he goes around the country. That's the reaction of people when they're informed. But if we allow the mainstream media and the Democrats to do with this basically brainwashing attempt, it's fundamentally an old sophist trick going back to ancient Greece. I pointed that out in one of my discussions, and it's really just repetition and drilling it in. It's like how Pavlov trained the dogs. That's how you train people. You condition them. You get them to think this way, and that's the process they've been using and trying to adopt it. Now people are going around it in the web, and that's the answer. Some way to get it out to people that isn't controlled by the mainstream media or the existing swamp.
Yeah, Barbara, you have anything to add?
I agree with Bill wholeheartedly that the point that has to be gotten across to people is the survival of the president depends on you basically joining the battle and educating yourself to come up to his level. That's the challenge. You start off as a citizen and you realize that you're in a situation like the one we face now, and the president's survival depends upon him not being the sole guy who's out there fighting. It really is a question of taking the responsibility yourself and making yourself a leader. And that's really what's sort of, I was reading a book about the CIA the other day, this time, Bill, by that guy who wrote the article that you and I were discussing. He's an operations guy. And what he pointed out is that what's lacking in the CIA is the capacity to train actual leaders. There's so much groupthink in how Washington actually operates that they can't figure out how to produce leaders. And that's an overall problem within the country itself. Lynn talks persistently about entrepreneurs or farmers or people who have to make decisions upon which other people's livelihoods depend as being the type of person that actually can take responsibility and lead in these types of situations. And that's really when he talked about who we need to focus on and recruit, it's that type of person that we can give the knowledge to who can organically lead, which makes it just not knowledge disseminated out there, but knowledge which sticks and causes the formation of a movement which they can't stop. And that's really what this whole thing is about at this point.
Okay, very good. We have a couple other questions. Oh, and one person was having a problem, I think, dropped off a couple times. Invite you to call back in. There's somebody else in the queue right now. Let me actually just, I'll go to one person that's in. We have 3 or 4 text messages I'm going to try to combine, sort of deal with this, and they're all directed at you, Bill. So I'll just see who we have one right now, and then I'll go to those, and then we'll see where we are. Okay, are you able to hear me? Hello?
Hello, this is John from Toronto.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just wondered if you ever heard about that guy who wrote the poem about "Thou too, Ceylon, O ship of state." Ceylon.
Do you have? Wait. Hold on. Do you have an actual question for either of the people, or?
Yeah, for the conference, the call.
Go ahead.
The American poet Longfellow.
Yes.
Who wrote "Thou too, Ceylon, O ship of state." So Ceylon, O Union, strong and great. Humanity, with all its hopes and all its fears for future years, is hanging breathless at thy fate. That's my question. Did anybody ever hear of that guy?
Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, that's his question. We answered it. The answer is yes. So now, here's the combination of things we had, which are sort of, Bill, they're all directed at you. One of them is sort of a question about how whether you've been in touch with Ed Snowden and what you think about what he actually did. What is the material that he released before still resonating, and how does that in some fashion affect the present circumstance around intelligence? That was sort of what the thing actually was. The second question, which is sort of related to that, is can you actually, and you've actually addressed this before, is there a way to do surveillance without what we're seeing, which is this complete abuse, including of the president, including of his campaign, including of the various people like Flynn and so on? That's the second sort of related. And then the third portion I know I sort of put it. So the Snowden is one. The question of surveillance without abuse is the second part. And the third is sort of how do you correctly do intelligence so that you actually can put together a picture that is an accurate picture that's independent of spin and other things. That's sort of the three parts of what I've gotten in the various text messages.
Okay, well, let me see if I can do this, if I remember everything. First of all, I've never communicated directly with Edward Snowden. He's Skyped into some conference I've been to, but I've never really addressed him directly. Well, I think pretty much what he's done is I look at him as a patriot exposing the crimes that are being committed by our government. For the most part, I mean, there were some things that were sensitive. I think he shouldn't have taken with him, but he probably didn't have time or know exactly how much he was scraping up there, and some of that was probably inappropriate. And let's see, what was the other one now?
Surveillance without abuse.
Oh, okay, yeah. There's that was what we did with the Thin Thread program in 1990s. And that fundamentally was not what Bush, Cheney, Hayden, and Tennant wanted, because they were the ones at the core of the decision to make it to open up, because we had a filter up front on our sessionizer and processors, where we could look at something of the order of we were planning on doing 20 terabytes a minute as our first goal, and then that's a lot of stuff, by the way. So, but we were able to look into that. And we had a filter on it that only pulled out relevant information, that is, known bad guys and people who were potentially associated with them based on behavior within that data. And we had all those defined and how to do that. And that was our filter up front, so we only took in maybe, 0.0001% of the data. And the rest of it we simply let go by. And that's how we managed that data. And then we encrypted that values that would identify people so we could keep them secret until we could prove that they were a part of it. In other words, we were trying to follow the law and the constitutional rights of everybody. So, and that we actually were doing. And those are the things that Hayden and Tennant and his people removed. So they removed the protections that we built in for people. And I put that on them.
Okay. I think the last question, which was a more general question, which was how you put together an intelligence picture without spin. I think the reason for that from the person, I know the person sent it, was they basically, we're talking about partisanship, but on the other hand, how would you develop an intelligence picture that's not partisan, but could be used by people in presidential or other positions without abuse? I think that's basically the notion.
Well, that was the other part we had in our Thin Thread program in the 1990s, was a monitoring program. So we monitored who came into the data that we had, our system, where they went and what they were doing, and we could see that kind of abuse occurring. And at that point, we could alert everybody that someone was doing something improperly, So, and that also they removed. So they didn't want any. First of all, they wanted all the data, and they didn't want anybody to know they wanted to know everybody in the data, and they didn't want anybody to know what they were doing with the data. So that's why they had to remove all of the programs we had, the protections for people, the filter, the encryption of the identity process, and then the monitoring, so that we could detect abuse of anybody coming into the data. That would include everybody in the world, not just because not only the Five Eyes, but also the intelligence community, the CIA, the FBI, and the DEA. They all have access directly into the NSA database, as well as about 8 or 9 other countries, but I'm sure their parts are partitioned, so there's only limited amounts of data that they could address. But again, it's the idea that many people look into that, and all of them, or a good many of them, are done. That's all done without oversight or attempted oversight whatsoever. There's no real oversight in the U.S. government. It's just an attempt at a showing that they have something put in place that they call oversight, but it really isn't.
Okay, very good. Barbara, you have any comment on any of that?
Yeah, I think one of the questions that was asked of Bill is, one level of thinking about it is the impeachment trial itself. The other level of thinking about it is it's clear to me, based on what I've been watching occur in the Senate, that Mike Lee and Rand Paul now have a whole bunch of people who are actively talking about abolishing the FISA court.
That should happen. I agree.
And of course, that creates the ideal situation in the Senate for Bill to come in and say, here's how you can do this and do it according to the Constitution. And by the way, there was no Russian hack, and I can show it. So it seems to me that we ought to think about that as a major flank at this point, putting a lot of pressure on that particular issue and what Bill has to say about it in particular.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to segue to the conclusion, because I think this is where, and you've already begun it here, we get to Jackie's, scalp hunt, because that's the idea. You see, in other words, what we want to do is do surgical, tactical approaches, taking forces which are limited but very efficient, meaning our own. With us, we have we're capable as organizers. We've seen this in certain areas. For example, Florida, where we've recruited some 300 people approximately to become members of our organization in the last 4 weeks. Okay, well, that's a very important state for the election. It's one of the largest states by population in the country. And it has a lot of people there also who are retired who know something about various things. There's military intelligence people, there are engineers, there's space program people. Okay, well, what would you do to put this together and to put together something that would mean something? That is, in terms of looking at the idea that there's a constitutional crisis in the country. I think this is something that Barbara referenced. She may say a bit more about right now around our alert service, around the building up of our publications. But I think there's another thing, which is sort of a way to think about it, which is a citizens intelligence service. The CIA, yes, but a different kind of thing, where the concept is not that everybody knows how to do intelligence and everybody clips things or something and somehow that makes you an intelligence officer, but rather that there is an interest. We define a way to actually discover what we need to know. So like what Barbara just said about the Senate, the issue of Bill testifying in front of the U.S. Senate and just telling the story why he says this could never have occurred in the way it's been described to you whatsoever. We're not saying that something didn't occur, but what has been described as having occurred could not have occurred in the way in which it's been described. Okay? Now that would be not just explosive, but of course it has a kind of, it's called unraveling the hereditary axiom. It's like if you get rid of that piece, everything else, right? It's like if you take that brick out, the whole building falls down. So I just wanted to invite both of you guys, sort of, if we're kind of at the conclusion, we don't have anybody else in the queue, and I think we can kind of begin summarizing. Just say whatever your thoughts are on how we might proceed. At this stage now, with 1 day after the impeachment, people are mad as hell, largely. Other people are confused as hell, but they want to be active. And by the time we get to this time next week, will be 1 day after Christmas. So it means that in terms of this call, most of the people on the call will have seen family. There's going to be discussion, obviously, over the dinner table and all that kind of thing. So let's think here of how we might want to address how people can help during the course of the week and immediately subsequent to that. So, Barbara, maybe you should start off, and then we'll go to Bill. How about that?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple ways to help. Number one, is the straight-up appeal for funds, okay? This is generally a difficult time of the year for us, and, as much as people can dig into their pockets and give us the funding, people go through Christmas and they have all sorts of things in their mind. They have all sorts of obligations, and it's a tough month for us. And we definitely need everybody on this call to go to the website, contribute what you can. If you contribute to an organizer, call that organizer and say, I'm on board for Christmas, and let's make it kind of like crossing the Delaware here in terms of our republic. because we need not just the broad thing of, yes, I'll throw in the bucks for the president's campaign. He's got lots of money, but we represent the crucial flank here. That's why you're on this call, and you understand that. And what we can organize is the very people which, he needs. He needs independents. He needs people who are walking away from the Democratic Party because they're disgusted. That's the constituency which is around Lyndon LaRouche and actually understands these ideas in depth. So that's one way to actually formalize, helping at this particular juncture. It's very, very important. The second thing I would encourage people to do, I spent a lot of time on a big strategic way of thinking, which was Lynn's Storm Over Asia, which we're going to get posted up on the website. I'd like people to just watch that over the holiday period, because it will introduce you to a very broad way of thinking about this battle in terms of what's actually happened over the course of the past 40 years, as Bill references, to put us into this situation. Who done it, and what's their nature? Because you have to understand who you're actually fighting, and that will open up vistas to you as to how you're going to fight this thing, which are much broader than the way it's being fought right now. And it's a way of achieving some form of victory. So I would encourage you, once we post it, to go to the website, read it. If you're not presently reading our magazine, the EIR, you should get that. You should just arm yourself with as much as you can to understand the terrain of this battle in the deepest sense. And that's what I would recommend. The Christmas period is generally a period where, I take it as a time to just nourish myself with as much knowledge as possible to go into the next phase of the battle. And by the time the Christmas season ends, we're going to be at the beginning of an election year, the election year, which is really going to determine which way this republic goes. So it's a crucial period, and people should use it in the way I indicated, and I want to put a particular focal point on, right now Congress is going to be in recess. There's going to be lots of stuff leaking and other things happening over the holidays. But I think to any extent you can get into a congressional or a Senate meeting or anything else that happens, I don't know that they will, you should go and you should tell your representative, hey, this thing's got to stop. It's tearing the country apart. It's harming the republic. We need to get the programs going which can actually punish the people who did this to us, but also the programs going which can ensure that there is an economic recovery in place which actually takes us somewhere. So those are the things I would outline as immediate kind of tasks at this point. And I'm sure Bill probably has more than I can offer.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Barbara. So, Bill, anything you'd like to add?
No, I just would like to say I agree with Barbara and everything she said. She was really pretty thorough about it. So I just see information and knowledge as the key to getting the country back on track. That is making sure that the population is informed so they can make informed judgments and informed decisions. That's the key.
Okay. And I'd just like to add to what you just said, Bill. Look, people obviously know we've been doing certain things with the phone calls, and they've become much more of a real, reference point, sort of sounding board. I really want to thank you for being on with us. You've helped us to sort of create an arc, and others will be coming on. Others are beginning to get active. It's been, and matter of fact, some of the things that have happened in the last days have been largely because of the character of dialogue over the several weeks we've gotten ourselves into. I think as that happens, many of the questions that people have about how to proceed get answered by doing things and by listening and then seeing what others are doing. I think that's the character of what we're really into. I guess let's leave this as people will, as I say, that it'll be Christmas before we have another one of these calls. And apart from what people think about the particulars of the holidays, of course, there's also the Hanukkah season will be intersecting Christmas this year, and the mythical Kwanzaa will also be intersecting all this. Is that as people think about this time, think about the following, right? There's the notion of Christmas was a way of trying to respond to a collapse of civilization and a collapse of hope. So the metaphor that is Christianity was a living practice. And the concept is that practice is something that did inform the creation of the Constitution of the United States very, very emphatically. I think people know that. But in this circumstance that we find ourselves, when you look at this challenge to the Constitution of the nation, which means to say the shape of the principles of the nation, then sometimes it's useful to think about the idea that there are things that are worth dying for, and that those things are intangible. They're not just flesh and blood. And that the reason that some people believe that there are powers, principalities and powers and forces of darkness and wickedness in high places, is that those things exist, but there are principles above that. There are principles above that, and those principles are what are called the good. And the good has, in fact, in history, prevailed over the evil. It doesn't do it, though, if you don't fight for it, as famously occurred 75 years ago, starting in the Ardennes forest and then concluding one phase of that, it concluded at Bastogne 75 years ago. You'll find the evil will fight like crazy, fight like hell, in fact. But in fact, it can be defeated if there's a war against it based on the principles that the Constitution has expressed and which the government and Republic of the United States have exemplified. This is something that a lot of us got from our work with Lyndon LaRouche and his emphasis on the presidency. And I just want to say, as we conclude, I would invite people to think about the fact that your actions on behalf of that presidency of the United States are a way of taking back a government that had been usurped a long time ago. But now you have a form of crisis that allows you, the citizen, to take it back in the form in which it was designed. I think this is the key way to think about our role and to act with the confidence that if we think about our role that way, we will succeed. So I think I will leave it at that. So on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to thank everybody, I want to welcome you to the fight that you're about to wage. Put it like that. And we're going to conclude now tonight.
This session is no longer being recorded. Goodbye.